Hello, Bio 112 students. Welcome to Chapter 17, Animals with Miss Hook. So in this chapter, we're going to look at the different animal life, different adaptations that have occurred between the species and how they've differentiated and diversified in this world. We're going to look at the different phyla of animals, the different phylum. Most animals on the planet are arthropods, and within them, most of them are beetles. Scientists have found over 350,000 different species of beetles, and they're still identifying more. We'll look at flatworms like tapeworms that you can have inside of your intestines that can release eggs through there. We'll look at mammals that include whales. The largest animal is the blue whale. And we'll look at reptiles, and they have interesting metabolisms where they can survive on only 10% of the calories a mammal needs. So where did it all start? It all started in the Precambrian. So if you remember the geologic time periods, the Precambrian was the longest and it was the first. And at that time we had some multicellular creatures and they could eat others. So what exactly is an animal? They are eukaryotic, so they've got a nucleus, multicellular, heterotrophs. So what that means is heterotrophs, they don't make their own energy, they need to ingest it. So they take in food. Most animals reproduce sexually. They go through meiosis, have gametes, send them out, although there are some that can reproduce asexually as well. They have muscle cells and nerve cells, especially once we get past the sponges, that control those muscles. So these are different brains of different animals. And if you look even down to an alligator, for example, they have the same neural network formation, the same order, the same nerves have the same origination points as our more complex brains. Early animals hit what was called the Cambrian explosion. So we went from Precambrian to Cambrian, and we're still a very long time ago, 542 million years ago. You had animals undergoing this rapid diversification. So we had adaptations, speciation, where we saw new species occurring. And how biologists determine the phylogeny, how things fit together. We've talked a bit about these methods before, comparative anatomy, like comparing the bone structure, and embryology, comparing the embryo development. The fossil record can tell us when things occurred, first showed up, but they can't tell us how they're related. So there were three key evolutionary branching points hypothesized. One, true tissues. A tissue is a group of cells working together for the same function. So your heart, for example, is made out of cardiac muscle tissue. That has special features that keep the cells connected together and they can send electrical impulses. It looks very different than your skin, for example. They have body symmetry. We'll look at the different types of symmetry. We're symmetrical in that if you cut down the center of our body into right and left, we're mirror images. And then you've got body cavities. Inside us, we've got our thoracic cavity with our lungs and our heart. We've got our abdominal pelvic cavity, our stomach, our digestive organs, bladder, for example. So the first branch, true tissues, those cells working together. So sponges are kind of like the intermediate between animal and non-animal. They've got different types of cells, but they're not really true tissues. So after that point, we see these groups of cells that are similar in structure functioning together that form a tissue. Next, body symmetry. So you can have a couple different types. You can have radial symmetry, like circles, where you can cut really anywhere here in half, and they're mirror images. Or you can have bilateral symmetry, like we have, where you cut down the middle, and you have a right and left, down like the sagittal plane, and they're the same. And body cavities. So body cavities get more complex as we go, and then they allow us to have these more complex systems. So you've got in animals these three layers of development. You've got what's called an ectoderm, that's the outer layer, the mesoderm, the middle, and the endoderm, the internal. And you can see, so you've got like a digestive tract here. These form the different parts of our body, even in us as we develop, although ours are far more complex than a flatworm. But you can have some that have this whole coelom. So animals can either have no body cavity, have what's called a pseudocoelom, like a false coelom, or a true coelom. So this space in pseudocoeloms, like false, pseudo is false, they have a space here, but it's not lined on both sides by that middle layer. You just got the middle layer and then the inner layer and the space. True coeloms, like what we have, you've got it lined on both sides by the mesoderm, the middle layer. So that would be like our abdominal pelvic cavity, for example, with our digestive system in the middle. We've got a lining around that. So we're going to look at the phylogenetic tree and look at the different adaptations that occur. So the first one that we discussed was tissues. So sponges have different cells, but no true tissues. And then symmetry. Radial symmetry we'll look at the cnidarians, and then bilateral symmetry from there on out. The most common phylum is invertebrates. We talked about how beetles are even the biggest on their own. Those are animals without backbones. We don't really think about them that much, but they represent almost all of the animal kingdom. They represent 95%. So let's start with invertebrates that don't have a true backbone. We're going to go simpler to more complex. So first is sponges. So they're the phylum Porifera. Think about pores, they have holes, they're sponges. So that includes sessile animals. That means that they don't move. People thought they were plants. And they lack true tissues. So what they do is they draw water in where it's collected. So here you can see they put dye in and it goes through the sponge's central cavity. That's the whole group. There the dye is going in. The sponge filters it. So they're filter feeders. They wait for their food to come to them. Here you can see some of the different cells that are there. And these cells, they are believed to be evolved from these protists. We didn't cover protists very much, but you've got these flagellates with flagella, these cells that are protists, and then they found that they think they came together and then differentiated into different cell types. So here's this example where you could have a group of colonial, that means they stick together, group of protists with these flagella, and then they could form into specialized cells. Next, we've got cnidarians. So we talked about how they have radial symmetry. So they're circular. They've got two different forms that we'll look at, and they have what are called cnidocytes. Cytes mean cells. Cnide means combining form. So you've got these two forms. Cnidocytes sting. That's what hurts you if you get stung by a jellyfish. So the basic body plans of cnidarians, there are two forms. You've got the polyp, that sessile that stays in one place, and the floating, the moving medusa. They both have the same portions, but they're a little bit different structured. So some species will only be in polyp, whereas others can be both depending on the part of their life cycle. So polyps, you've got sea anemones and corals. Hydras we looked at when we looked at asexual reproduction. And then the organisms that are jellyfish are medusas. Those are the ones with the top and free-floating bodies with tentacles. Next we've got flatworms. That phylum is Platyhelminthes. Platy is Greek, it means flat, so think of a plate as flat, and helminthes means worms, so we got flatworms. Here we've gone from the symmetry of cnidarians, that's round, to bilateral, that left and right. So we'll look at the different types of flatworms, like planarians. These are a common one for students to look at in real life and dissect. And then you've got the beautiful marine flatworms that can have beautiful coloration. And remember, these ones don't have a respiratory system, so the way that the cells in the middle of their body get oxygen is through diffusion. So it has to be thin enough that the oxygen can get to those middle cells, otherwise they die. And they did calculations and they found that the flatworms are just as thick as they could possibly be and still get oxygen into those middle portions. You also have what's starting here is called cephalization. Cephalization means you're getting ahead. These sensory cells are organizing and grouping together, and they've got eye spots that can tell the difference between light and dark. Some flatworms are parasitic. Blood flukes, for example, the cartoon The Oatmeal, for example, has a really funny portion on the parasitic flatworm, uh, Dicrocolum dendriticum, and that's pretty funny. You should check that out. This is a snail. That's going to be another example of a parasitic form. You can see that when it's healthy, it has these black eye stalks, but when he's infected through bird poop, you have the flukes grow inside there, and they make him change his behavior. He climbs up his vegetation here, and he's looking for a bird. So there's these multiple steps of the life cycle, and they have to go from host to vector, and then the bird will come and eat him, so it can go between the two portions of its life cycle. Tapeworms are another example that people can be infected with. What happens is they've got these long bodies, and inside there they've got their reproductive. Tapeworms are hermaphrodites, so they have both male and female reproductive structures in there. And there's the head that has its hooks on there that it can get stuck in with. Here's a picture of a tapeworm in a dog's stomach. So pets can get these too. So they're ingested, they go down into your digestive system, and they start growing. And what happens is they send off the end of their bodies, these little squares detach, and they have their fertilized egg in fecal matter. And then someone ingests the fecal matter, usually in like water that's unsanitary, and they get the tapeworm eggs and they start growing again. Next, we've got nematoda, roundworms. So you've got roundworms all over the place. Trichinella, that's like in pigs. Another example would be hookworm. If we eat undercooked, like pork, for example, that's what you can have. You'll ingest the eggs and they'll mature, and females will produce more eggs. They have a very interesting body system. So now we've got two openings, a mouth and an anus. It's got a complete digestive tract that things move through. So if you remember flatworms, the Platyhelminthes, they just had a mouth. Now we've got a full tract. And then you had Annelida. So these are worms with body segments. So an earthworm is Annelida. It's not a roundworm, even though you might think it is. But you have to remember that earthworms are more complex than this. They have hearts. They have multiple hearts. They have a blood vessel system. They've got 5 hearts, and I tried to find a cartoon that was cute that said earthworms have 5 hearts but no one to love, and it's kind of sad. But I couldn't find it. It kept just showing me Earthworm Jim pictures, which is a very fun video game. So there are 3 classes of annelids. Earthworms, they go through the soil, break down nutrients so that plants can use them more easily. That's why they're good for your garden. Polychaetes, poly, many. Chaetes means bristles, so they're many bristles. And leeches. Some of these are parasitic. We've most likely all seen a leech or had one to attach to us at one point. Next, arthropods. So arthropods include insects, so they're the most diverse. They have the most species overall. They're really interesting. Arthropods, jointed feet. So they have jointed appendages. So we'll look at crustaceans, arachnids, and insects. So here you can see, for example, a lobster, and it's got multiple different segments with swimming appendages on there. Their whole outer section is an exoskeleton, and it's very hard, made of chitin, this very strong protein, and if they want to get bigger, they have to shed it. In the next video, we'll get more into the different arthropod diversity that there is.